It's time for the Your Personal Bank Show with Ferenc Toth. In an era of chaos, confusion, and craziness, Ferenc is a voice for common sense. As a financial literacy educator, speaker, and entrepreneur, Ferenc cuts through the noise to help us understand how current events affect our money, economy, and our freedom. Now, here's Ferenc Toth.
Welcome to the Your Personal Bank Show. This is Ferenc. Good to be back. I've had a couple of great interviews the last couple of weeks. If you missed them, with Kip and Laura Brown and John Burley the last 2 weeks. If you missed those interviews, go to yourpersonalbank.com. You can listen to this or any of the previously recorded shows anytime you like. You also can reach out and contact me, and yes, you will reach me. So some economic news that I think you should be aware of, and I think you'll find very interesting. First of all, the number of U.S. consumers that are behind on their bills is now at 17%, according to the latest annual Fed survey. In fact, 36% of lower income households with family income less than $25,000 did not pay all of their bills. And nearly 27% of consumers who rent their homes are unable to pay their bills in full. In fact, 11% of those people did not pay water, gas, or electric bills, which are the most common of all categories. At the same time, U.S. credit card interest rates have now hit an average of 23% in August, which is a new record. In fact, over the past 2 years, the rates have increased by 7 percentage points. U.S. consumers now have a record $1.36 trillion in credit card debt, and they're paying over $300 billion annually in interest. To put this in perspective, that is double the interest that was Americans paid just in 2019. 4-year period, interest paid on credit cards by U.S. American consumers has doubled. At the same time, U.S. auto loan delinquencies are starting to skyrocket. They are now nearing 3%, which is the highest we've seen since the Great Recession. They're approaching levels very similar to that, and in fact, the percentage of auto loan delinquencies has doubled in the last 2.5 years. And at the same time, the total amount of auto loan debt has nearly doubled since 2008 levels. Car insurance costs have jumped by an average of 15% and hit a new record in 2024. What is the cause of all this? While the September CPI inflation rate was only 2.4%, inflation on much of the basic necessities for Americans has gone up far more. Car insurance, over 16%. Transportation, 8%. Homeowners, nearly 5%. Car repairs, rent, hospital services, all at near 5% increases. Even electricity has gone up nearly 4%. Core CPI inflation is probably a better measure, and this is one that the Federal Reserve pays much closer attention to, has now increased 3.3% and is rising. And at the same time, over 250,000 Americans filed for unemployment just this past week. Consumers are struggling. The number of people working multiple jobs in the U.S. hit over 8 million in September, which is also a new record. This is over 300,000 more above the peak of the pandemic. And the number of part-time jobs has jumped by over 3 million over the past 3 years, while the number of full-time jobs has declined by 1 million at the same time. Multiple job holders have been rising rapidly over the last few years as Americans are fighting record high prices, and millions of Americans are now working multiple jobs just to afford the basic necessities. U.S. consumers are struggling, but it's just not the consumers. Businesses are too. In fact, 43% of the Russell 2000 companies are unprofitable, which is the most since the COVID crisis, and nearly the highest percentage ever recorded. Interest expense is one of the biggest culprits for many of these companies. Smaller companies are typically less able to handle excess expenses like interest. And that's why U.S. consumer inflation expectations for the next 5 to 10 years have increased dramatically. In fact, the metric of the sentiment has doubled in the last several months. Consumer sentiment obviously has been severely damaged by rising prices of necessities, and future expectations are getting worse as consumers continue to be hammered by high inflation that continues to grind month after month, year after year. Again, is not the 1 month measurement or even the 1 year measurement of inflation that's important. It's the continuing, ongoing inflation that has now been at over 3% for nearly 4 years straight. It's the net cumulative effect of the increases that is so damaging to consumers and businesses. And remember, inflation, according to the great economist Milton Friedman, who stated inflation is a function of federal spending. He taught that the cost of the federal government should not be measured by the tax rate or the amount of taxes taken by the government, but by the rate of federal spending. When Congress spends too much, it drives up prices. For example, the latest fiscal numbers came out that the federal government has now spent approximately $1.8 trillion more than they received. The previous year was $1.7 trillion. Total spending was something like $6.7 trillion. We're approaching $7 trillion per year of government spending. That's the real cost of government. And look, whether you pay it in tax or you pay it in inflation, we as Americans, citizens or otherwise, frankly, pay that price. We pay for the cost of government, and the cost of our government is now approaching $7 trillion per year. Now, this is creating what many consider a worst case scenario. You see, the Federal Reserve can easily fight a mild recession with low inflation, which happened in the 1970s, the Paul Volcker era, which when they did kill inflation dead back then. But a mild recession with rising inflation is the worst possible outcome. The Federal Reserve really struggles. They don't have tools in their arsenal to fight both. And here's another interesting fact about the jobs data, because people pay attention to this closely. Well, it turns out the September's jobs report, which was the second largest monthly increase on record. In fact, when you dig into it further, you find out that a whopping 85% increase in total payrolls came from the government jobs. In fact, the number of government workers has now hit a new all-time high of over 22 million. And this is what's helped push unemployment rate down to 4.1%. In fact, without the government jobs, the unemployment rate would be about 4.5%. The government is influencing the jobs numbers by literally hiring more government employees, which ultimately contributes to more inflation and higher government spending, not the opposite. And that's why we've now reached another level of insanity regarding the national debt, which has now hit a whopping 35.7 trillion, which is an all-time high. It increased 345 billion just in 3 days this past month. And a lot of that is because of the new government hiring a record number of government employees. Now, this creates an opportunity. With all the bad news, there's still opportunities. There's always winners and losers. And one of the key points here is that the staggering amount of government spending, now over 1.8 trillion, more than they receive, while alarming, again, creates an opportunity. And that opportunity is this. The government, when they print more money than they receive in tax revenues, they are required to sell bonds. Record amount of government spending, overspending, is creating a situation where they're having to sell a record amount of bonds. Now, to get these bond buyers to purchase these bonds, they have to entice them by offering higher interest rates. As many economic experts are pointing out, the fiscal ineptitude in Washington puts a natural floor on how low bond returns, the interest paid on bonds, will go. In fact, until the federal government starts to reduce spending, there will be an upward push on bond yields, bond returns, or interest rates. Higher bond interest rates will affect all interest rates, all types of borrowing. And many experts are predicting that the 10-year Treasury should be in the range of around 4.5% long term because of the excess government spending. Again, this creates an opportunity. That's why this article from BlackRock is now stating that we are now in the golden age of fixed income. Again, bonds are going to be paying higher interest rates than they have for decades consistently for extended periods of time. And one of the ways to benefit from that are fixed interest assets. Most people are familiar with CDs, bank monies, are going to pay solid returns, bonds, of course, and dividends. Dividends with insurance companies, which historically pay higher than bond return rates because insurance companies also have other income revenue sources. This is the best time we've seen in 42 years to invest in dividend paying insurance policies and annuities for that matter because of the higher bond interest rates. And frankly, there's no end in sight at this point until our federal government can return to some financial sanity and stop spending more than it receives. Until that happens, bond yields, bond returns, interest paid on bonds will continue to be strong. Dividends will continue to be strong and will continue to rise for the foreseeable future. Most predictions are between the next 3 to 5 years. Some are even saying the next 10 years. So if you're looking for a place to invest your money, insured, guaranteed, tax-free, and highly liquid, and likely an increasing return for the next 3 to 5 years, if not longer, contact me at yourpersonalbank.com and I'll share with you how to do that. Stay tuned in the next segment because I have some more economic news about the markets and history that I think you'll find very interesting.
Stay tuned for more common sense from Ference. For more information, contact Ference at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show with Ference Toth. Want more information? Contact Ference at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Now back to the show with Ference Toth.
Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show. This is Ference. If you want to reach me, you can do so at yourpersonalbank.com. And yes, you will reach me. Again, it's yourpersonalbank.com. So this record level of government spending, while increasing and causing inflation and the amount of bond selling that treasuries that the federal government has to sell to support the excess spending, is pushing bond interest rates higher and will continue to do so for the next several years at least, again, until the federal government decides to stop spending more than it receives. At this point, there's no end in sight. The lack of financial responsibility of our federal government, though, does create opportunities. Instead of being mad at your employer because of how little you make, you need to start getting mad at your government because of how much they take. That's where the real problem lies. And the other piece of this, of understanding that's key, is there is no such thing as government funded. It's all taxpayer funded. I share this constantly. It drives me nuts when a politician will discuss, hey, we're going to create these jobs or those jobs, or we're going to spend this money or that money. The federal government, all governments for that matter, have no money. Where do they receive funds? From the taxpayer. And when they spend more than they receive, they print more, the federal government does, which creates and enhances more inflation. Every person, every citizen should be angry when the government discusses spending our money. It's our money, not theirs. And unless they phrase it in those terms, they should be rejected and derided and, frankly, laughed out of office. Now, while all this is going on, there's significant amount of negative economic news if you just pay attention just a little bit, look under the hood, if you know what I'm saying. At the same time, investor sentiment in the stock market is reaching euphoric levels. I remember in the late 90s, the Federal Reserve Chair at the time discussing irrational exuberance. We're seeing much of those same types of things today that we saw back then, also similar to what we saw in the real estate leading up to the bubble that led to the Great Recession. U.S. households and professional investors at this time are all in on stocks. Fund managers are the most bullish ever recorded in history. Retail investors are more bullish than ever. Insiders, though, are selling shares like crazy. What possibly could go wrong? And that's why JP Morgan's strategy chief is saying, I am getting increasingly queasy, and recommended that investors should dial back risk amid market distortions. In fact, the markets are going up regardless of good or bad news if it seems like all news is treated as good news. That's called euphoria. And Warren Buffett has been famous for stating, be fearful when others are greedy. His actions are speaking even louder than his words in the fact that he has sold more stock recently than at any point in his career. That demonstrates that, in his opinion, stocks are overvalued, and he expects a correction and sees an opportunity. You might want to heed his advice and his actions. And here's some other news that most seniors are probably not aware of. In fact, this election season, this should be one of the most important messages that seniors should receive. The Biden-Harris administration took $230 billion from Medicare to fund EV tax credits. And then when the costs went up, they took more to delay premium spikes before the election. The Congressional Budget Office says that it will be a $21 billion hit to the Medicare Trust Fund. Many are calling this highway robbery. Frankly, it was never authorized by Congress, and frankly, some heads should roll. Again, they took the $230 billion from Medicare to fund EV tax credits, and by doing this, the predictions are now that Medicare Part D premiums will increase from $30 a month to $142 a month. And again, this should have already happened, but to protect the election, the Biden-Harris administration moved taxpayer money around to hide the increase until after November 10th. By the way, there is a Hatch Act violation going on, investigation currently as we speak. This is something that hardly I've heard anyone discuss, but do a little research. And if you are concerned about Medicare, any senior should be, the fact that the unethically and illegally, frankly, took money from Medicare to fund EV tax credits, everyone on Medicare is going to end up paying a whole lot more next year as a result. At the same time, Social Security benefits or payments are set to increase next year, 2025, by 2.5%. Yet, the Medicare premiums are going up 11.5% due to inflation. So the payments, they're increasing only 2.5%, yet the premiums are going to increase 11.5%. And only the government has the ability to play with the numbers, to monkey around, to make that happen and justify it. These types of things really help you understand why so many people are increasingly frustrated by our current administration and federal government. You see, you work your whole life, pay taxes, obey the law, and then lose your home in a hurricane, and you get $750 if you qualify. But being a criminal from a foreign land, illegally cross our border, you can even commit crimes, yet receive a $5,000 debit card, free phone, mortgage assistance, food stamps, housing, and many other benefits. And you wonder why people are getting increasingly frustrated. Also, I think this is wrong. When the average Social Security check in America is $1,200 a month, yet the average illegal receives $4,000 a month, that's a problem. The Social Security recipient, again, was a citizen that worked hard, paid their taxes, obeyed the law in most cases. Yet the illegal, who contributed nothing to our society, gets 3 or 4 times more. That is absolutely wrong. And our federal government seems to have no problem giving money, plenty of money, to other countries. Nearly $1 billion to Syria and Congo in this past year. Yemen, Somalia, and Afghanistan have all got over $1 billion. Egypt and Jordan both received nearly $1.5 billion. Ethiopia, almost $2 billion. Israel, $11 billion. And of course, a whopping $24 billion to Ukraine in 2024 year to date. We're not even done with the year. Yet Americans who lost everything in North Carolina, they get a whopping $750. Again, if they qualify. I think Congresspeople salary should be reduced to $750 until they close the border, stop funding other countries, and take care of disaster victims. How about that? In fact, let's expand it not just only to Congress, but how about everybody that works in government, the bureaucrats and all of them? Their salary got reduced to $750 a year until they fix this. I wonder how quickly that would get resolved. And according to some numbers from 2023, the cost of illegal immigrants per state is staggering. Some states are literally in the billions of dollars. Georgia, over $3 billion. Arizona, over $3 billion. Of course, California, $30 billion. Illinois, over $5 billion. Even Maryland, and not a very big state, $2 billion. Massachusetts, the same. Oregon, $1.5 billion. Texas, $5 billion. It goes on and on and on. These kind of expenses, these types of numbers are just not sustainable. And then I saw this chart. I thought this was incredible. And they were showing the number of inadmissible aliens per month, starting back in 2012 to current. And I was just looking at the Haitian immigrants, quote unquote, supposedly legal. And literally since 2012 until 2022, for those 10 years, almost zero Haitian immigrants came to the United States. There was a small blip back in 2016 where the U.S. let in approximately 2,000 Haitian immigrants for about a 6-month period. And if you remember, that's when they had major, massive earthquakes in Haiti. So the U.S. allowed in about a couple thousand Haitian immigrants over a period of about 6 months. Other than that, almost nothing until 2022 occurred. And then literally the numbers jumped all the way up to over 20,000 per month. There was no earthquake. There was no natural disaster. There was no political reason for all this to happen. Just the current administration, Biden-Harris, decided to let a bunch of people in, illegals, and you know the reason why. Now I'm going to discuss some things about the federal bureaucracy, particularly FEMA, in the next segment. I'm going to encourage you not to miss.
Stay tuned for more common sense from Ferens. For more information, contact Ferens at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show with Ferens Toth. Want more information? Contact Ferens at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Now back to the show with Ference Toth.
Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show. This is Ference. If you want to reach me, you can do so at yourpersonalbank.com. Yes, you will reach me. Again, it's yourpersonalbank.com. So let's talk about FEMA. As a result of these two major hurricanes that have occurred recently, North Carolina and Florida, FEMA has been in the hot seat because they've come out and stated they don't have enough money after North Carolina for additional storms. If we go to the FEMA website themselves, if you look at press releases over the past year or so, we have Department of Homeland Security announces $380 million in additional funding to communities receiving migrants. Another award of $110 million to assist migrants. Another $77 million for communities receiving migrants. Another $340 million for a new competitive awards process for communities receiving migrants. New York City to receive $104 million from FEMA for asylum seekers. These are headlines from the FEMA website itself. They state they have no more disaster funds, but an internal IG report states that the agency is sitting on billions of dollars for disaster assistance. And many Democrats are claiming FEMA has two different budgets, one for migrant resettlement, one for disaster relief. The truth is Congress never allocated FEMA any money to fund immigrants, legal or otherwise. The truth is the Biden-Harris administration just took the money. They stole it. Much like, as I stated in the previous segment, where the Biden-Harris administration took money from Medicare to fund EV tax credits, $230 billion in fact, which will increase Medicare Part D premiums starting 2025 from about $30 a month to over $140 a month. Just wait, folks, it's coming. If you don't believe it, it's coming. This is an administration that is absolutely out of control. They are not following rules, procedures, or the Constitution for that matter. Congress controls the purse strings, supposedly, and they allocate funds accordingly. And the reason the Constitution structures it this way is because Congress has some responsibility to the voters. The voters can vote out representatives that they do not believe are representing them accordingly. Now, to add insult to injury, the Biden-Harris administration recently, after stating they do not have any more money for hurricane disasters and only offering $750 to U.S. citizens that lost everything, again, if they qualify, they then just sent $237 million to Ukraine, get this, for storm preparation. Will receive preparedness aid ahead of winter, as well as food, shelter, health, and protection assistance for emergency medical teams, and vital water and sanitation systems are also being sent. You see, the Biden-Harris administration spent nearly $1 billion on illegals, which is why they don't have enough money for hurricane victims. Does that show you the Biden-Harris administration's priorities? While at the same time sending over $237 million to Ukraine for exactly the same thing, for storm preparedness, as they put it. Many people have seemed to have forgot that $42 billion was allocated for high-speed internet for rural areas. That was about 3 years ago. Do you know how many rural Americans have been connected to high-speed internet to date? The answer would be zero. $7.5 billion was allocated to build EV charging stations approximately 3 years ago. To date, they have built a total of 7, which means the cost per EV station, charging station, is about $1 billion. They passed a $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill. To date, no new infrastructure projects have even been started. And a lot of people are starting to ask questions, where did the money go? And I wouldn't be surprised that if the majority of those funds weren't redirected towards facilitating the flow of illegal aliens into the country. This might be one of the biggest financial scandals in the history of our country. And to give you an idea of what's been sent overseas, which is probably where some of this money came from, as quote unquote foreign assistance, just in this past year, American taxpayer money has been sent $3.2 billion for gender equity, $22 billion for poverty, helping other countries with poverty, $6 billion to help them fight hunger, $17 billion to help them with their health and well-being, $1.6 billion to help with education, $2 billion for economic growth, $16 billion to make their cities inclusive and safe and sustainable, $1.2 billion to other countries for climate. While many Americans are struggling to pay their bills, credit card debt is at all-time highs. Auto loan debt is nearing all-time highs. Delinquencies also. Many Americans are struggling with the higher costs due to inflation and the excess spending, and it keeps piling on and piling on and piling on. And if you lose your house due to a hurricane, a once-in-a-thousand-year event like in North Carolina, you might get $750. Again, you start to understand why people are starting to get frustrated and angry, as they should. There were Americans in North Carolina who were left to die begging their government for help that never came because the Biden-Harris administration turned FEMA into an illegal alien resettlement agency. So there just was no money there for them. You know, not a single taxpayer dollar should be sent overseas until every American who lost their homes due to hurricane disasters have electricity, running water, and have gotten the assistance they need to get back on their feet again and get their homes back again. You see, that's what it means to be American first, not American last. It's shocking we even need to say this. It's shocking that we have a situation where we have to point out that Americans who paid the bill, American taxpayers, should be taken care of first before all this money gets sent overseas. Folks, the Biden-Harris administration has been guilty of all these things. Vote accordingly. I know people are voting now and voting early. That's great. They should do that. Keep these things in mind. These are your fellow Americans. Whether you agree with them or not, they're still your fellow Americans. Why should somebody overseas be treated better or get more money, benefits, opportunities than a law-abiding U.S. citizen? Here's another thing to consider when you vote. Do you realize Kamala Harris is paying her social media influencers more than families who lost everything from the hurricanes? Let that sink in. And in case you're on the fence between Kamala or Trump, billions and billions of dollars have been wasted on illegals she let in. Billions of dollars have been stolen from Medicare to fund EV tax credits. Congress didn't authorize this. The American voters did not vote for this. They just decided to do it and not tell anybody. If you sense I'm frustrated, you're sensing correctly. And if somebody's supporting Kamala despite all of these things, I'm incredibly frustrated by that thought process. Two things I hear from, and I've spoke to many of them, Kamala supporters, is all about abortion and the threat to democracy. The second one's easy, threat to democracy. If Trump was going to destroy this country, he would have done so the 4 years he was president. So that argument makes zero sense. And as far as abortion rights, read the Constitution. It's not listed in the Constitution, and Article 10 of the Bill of Rights states that everything that's not in these powers that were designated, called enumerated powers, are to go to the states. The U.S. Supreme Court, by overturning Roe v. Wade, made the correct constitutional decision. The federal government has no role in abortion or education or many other things that they're involved with, for that matter. And the more we can divest the federal power, the better. These are issues that should go to the states. And anyone in a blue state has not lost their rights to abortion because most of those allow abortion through full term. Other states do not. If you do not like that or agree with that, you have two choices. You can either work to change the rules in each state, which is constitutional, or move. That is the right of every American. And if you try to shove these rules down everyone's throats, no one's going to be happy. As I stated to many of these supporters, if you pick a time frame, you argue where should abortion be legal or not, there will always be a significant group of people that will be unhappy. That's the beauty of having 50 states, 50 sets of rules. Therefore, everyone can have the set of rules that they prefer and can live in those states that they agree with, or again, work to change the rules. That is our constitutional system. Stop trying to make us all the same, because we're not. Stay tuned in the last segment. I got a few more things to share that I think you're going to find extremely interesting.
Stay tuned for more common sense from Ference. For more information, contact Ference at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show with Ference Toth. Want more information? Contact Ference at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Now back to the show with Ference Toth.
Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show. This is Ference. If you want to reach me, you can do so at yourpersonalbank.com. And yes, you will reach me, yourpersonalbank.com. Abysmal response that our federal government had to the recent hurricanes, particularly in North Carolina, has got me fired up for many, many reasons. Did you know that the governor of North Carolina, Democrat, Roy Cooper, only deployed 175 National Guard troops in advance of Helene, where you had other governors, Florida, Georgia, deployed 10 times more than that? North Carolina governor's failures made a disastrous situation even worse. That's ineptitude, folks, at best. And I love this point I heard. We've got free flights for illegals all over the place. Our federal government has been flying in illegals from around the world, tens of thousands per month, just so they can claim there's fewer border crossings. Yes, they're not crossing the border, physically crossing the border. That's because we're flying them in from their country to ours. Where are all the free flights for Floridians to get out of the way of the hurricanes? Shouldn't the citizens deserve free flights first? And I love this one. A lot of the liberals and leftists are saying, well, if Trump wins and deports the illegals, who's going to work the farms? Well, that's really easy. The jobs can go to all the former government employees once Elon starts making cuts. We don't need 22 million government employees. That's ridiculous. Our government was never, ever designed to be the massive organization that it is, and to be involved in the myriad, there's over 600 government agencies, many of them with overlapping responsibilities. That's ridiculous. 600. I agree with Elon where he says there should be no more than 99 at most. And that's even probably too high. And as he stated, he'd like to get rid of 80% of government employees so it would be far more efficient. It likely would be. I believe he's right. Our government needs to be more lean, more efficient, and needs to focus on the responsibilities that it's supposed to focus on and get out of all the stuff that is unconstitutionally doing, that has no business, no right, no authority in. None whatsoever. Read the Constitution. There's a short list of things that the federal government is responsible for. Things like military, commerce, security, keeping citizens safe, which most of those things it's failing at abysmally, and everything else it does, it has no constitutional right. So take those away. I'm in full agreement. And if the federal bureaucracy is dismantled, they won't have the manpower or the capability to do the things that they have no business being doing. And this whole idea here is, it's kind of interesting how the federal government never seems to run out of money for illegals and foreign wars, yet it doesn't have enough for U.S. citizens. It just shows that the focus, the priority of the current administration, Biden Harris, is completely and totally screwed up, completely backwards of what it should be. And I like this point. It was actually made by Kevin Sorbo. And he says, the moment when somebody says to me, I can't believe you'd vote for Trump, is I simply reply, I'm not voting for Trump. I'm voting for the First Amendment and freedom of speech, and for the Second Amendment and the right to defend my life and my family, and for the next Supreme Court justices to protect the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and for the continued growth of retirement accounts and reducing inflation. And I'm voting for a return of our troops from foreign countries and wars and to end these endless wars. I'm voting for the Electoral College and for the republic where we live, for police to be respected again, ensure law and order. I'm tired of the criminals having a revolving door and being put back in the street. And I'm voting for the continued appointment of federal judges who respect the Constitution. I'm voting for keeping our jobs in America and not to be outsourced all over the world, and for secure borders and legal immigration. It's amazing. We actually have flown 380,000 illegal immigrants into our country. And I'm voting for doing away with all the freebies given to all the illegals and not looking for the needs of the American citizens. And I guess that's what I'm really been focused on with these hurricanes and the disaster. It's egregious. It's frustrating. It's embarrassing that our country, our government, our current administration has the audacity, the gall, to give millions and billions of dollars to foreign countries, yet they can't do anything, next to nothing, for U.S. citizens. Again, if a government cannot protect the citizens and then wastes the citizens' taxpayer money on foreign governments, what's the point? In fact, not only is it why do we have a government, in fact, that government is not only a hindrance, but an actual active adversary to the U.S. citizen. They're an enemy of the citizen. And thankfully, we still have elections and we have the opportunity to replace these people. So again, it's really quite simple. Who do you want to vote for? I know most people have made up their minds. I get that. But there are also a lot of people who normally don't participate in the election process. If you don't like the way things are going, and by the way, the latest poll shows 79% of Americans think our country's headed in the wrong direction, well, then do something about it. Go vote. You can go vote early in person in most states. And even if you're in a state where overwhelmingly it typically is blue, you still should vote, because at least if Trump wins the popular vote and the Electoral College, it gives the Democrats less to argue about. It'll give him more power to accomplish things, to change things for the better for American citizens. And it's not that we love Trump. Many people don't. It's he's the person in position to do something about it and has the willingness to do something about it. Because not only do we get Trump, we get Elon Musk, who's agreed to work with cost cutting and efficiency, becoming the efficiency expert, having one of the most brilliant business people, the richest man in the world, working for free, increase efficiency, reduce the bloat of the federal government. Who can be against that? If you're against that, you just love government way, way too much. You need some self-reliance and believe in yourself and your fellow citizens that we have a great opportunity, a great country, and a great economy if the government would just get out of the way. And how about having an RFK going after the pharmaceutical companies and the food manufacturers that have been poisoning our country and our people for decades now? If you're not in favor of that, what kind of person are you? You're in favor of poisoning foods and more people being sick and obese and having chronic disease and obesity and everything else? My point is, things need to change. We cannot continue going down the same path we're going, or literally we're not going to see a society or government that most of us are familiar with. You see, a great way to look at it is the U.S. government has become a completely out of control HOA. You see, it has a narrow, limited purpose, but it's far exceeding the scope of its authority. And the problem is, it has guns and authority to back it up. Saw this, I thought this was great. Washington, D.C. needs to be razed to the ground. The ground needs to be salted and sage burned. We need a team of exorcists to come in, and that's how bad this cesspool has become. You see, politicians, much like NASCAR drivers, should be required to wear the logos of all the companies that back them. That would give you a much better idea of who they're actually working for versus the people that voted them in and they're supposedly supposed to represent. And private citizens and churches who take initiative are some of the greatest dangers to the perpetuation of power of the current administration and the regime, even over the last several decades. You see, for the government, it's not a good idea to let common citizens come to the realization that they do not depend totally on the government. And these recent hurricanes have really drove that point home. And I've said on this show, I've kind of been hard on men for a while. Where are the men in this world? Well, you know what? We're starting to see that. And I couldn't be more proud. You see, why does the left hate white men? Well, do you think it's because the war on straight white men is because people will come to realize that they don't need the government? In fact, the people that relied on government suffered, and some even died in North Carolina. And there are today still men out there that are ignoring government dictates and orders to stand down. And they're giving aid to flood survivors, and they're risking jail and punishment, and they're pushing through exhaustion. And frankly, I couldn't be more proud. It's one of the greatest things I've seen in a while. You see, when there's a crisis, but you don't look for a feminist, you look for a man. And that's what we need. There's nothing toxic about it. Strong men doing what they do best, protecting and taking care of their loved ones and their community, the people in their circle. And maybe that will be the impetus to turn things around. We have an election coming up just in a few short weeks. Again, vote early. Go in person, vote early is the most secure way to do so. You see, our founding fathers would have already overthrown the current government that we have. We have that opportunity right now to vote and vote accordingly and truly make a difference in the direction of this country. If you want to learn how to take advantage and thrive through this economic uncertainty, through the federal government's fiscal irresponsibility, again, crisis creates opportunity. I'm going to recommend you contact me at yourpersonalbank.com. I'll be happy to help you to show you how to thrive through this until we get to the other side. I'm very hopeful that we will. I'm more and more encouraged every day as more people wake up and stand up. We want a different direction for this country. We want to get back to our roots, a 1776 moment, if you will, of freedom. Contact me at yourpersonalbank.com for more information. As always, stay tuned next week for some more great information. And as long as it's on our money, in God we trust.
Listen Tuesdays at noon and Saturdays at 1 to the Your Personal Bank Show for more information. Contact Ference at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. This show is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information. The presenter and guests of this program do not engage in legal, accounting, or tax advice. Professional advice regarding your situation should be sought if required. Some products discussed may have limitations and not be available in all states. Excessive unpaid loans may affect performance. Distributions may become taxable if not managed properly. Replacements may not be suitable for everyone. There may be charges when replacing coverage. Dividend rates and bank line of credit rates may change. For current rates, contact Ference at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. Again, that's 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com.